All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you are. And I trust everybody was able to tune in to Lisa's keynote talking about the CodeLinaro story with Qualcomm in the last half hour or so. But this is now a new session dealing with CodeLinaro integrated. And Craig Northway from Qualcomm and myself are going to be going through and explaining how we actually integrated. CodeLinaro has been integrated into Qualcomm's build and release processes. So who are we? My name is Joshua Sickmeyer, and I'm a tech lead here with Linaro, and I work on in developer services. And developer services in Linaro is largely responsible for helping companies build, test, and deploy various products within ARM. And we've been working now on this project for the last year and a half, and really been dealing with design and concepts with Craig even before I came along for like the last maybe year, even so before that. And but I'm the tech lead for this project, CodeLinaro, and been working primarily with APIs and SaaS services up to this point. And so that's why this is actually a very good fit for what I do. And Craig, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Sure. Hi, my name is Craig Northway. I have been at Qualcomm now for 14 years. For those who don't know Qualcomm, we're an SoC provider, particularly in the mobile ecosystem, but our business is diversifying over the last few years into other industries like IoT and automotive and compute and so on. I lead our software content compliance team at Qualcomm, and so we're focused on our open source compliance processes as well as our open source release process.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining us today on this. So to answer the question to start with, as far as what is CodeLinaro, CodeLinaro is a fully integrated cloud-based collaboration platform that enables companies like Qualcomm to comprehensively and securely manage their software supply chain. We take various state-of-the-art SaaS providers that are out there, software as a service provider, and bring them all together into one API or one interface, one platform. So instead of having to go to each of these services individually, we'll get into this a little bit more detail as we go. We actually have one endpoint provided to the customer. They can then make a request, and then we do all the grunt work, so to speak, for them behind the scenes. And so it's a very, very fun project. And that's, in a nutshell, it really kind of sums up what CodeLinaro is. But Craig, can you tell us a little bit of why Qualcomm's decision to go with CodeLinaro and what drove you all to come to Linaro for this?
Sure, yeah, I can speak to the background of why we engaged with Linaro on this CodeLinaro concept. So we saw a real business need as our business diversified to enable less technically savvy partners. We had a lot more partners and customers that needed an easier onboarding process for our open source software, faster time to market. They needed more binaries and things pre-built. We also wanted to align what we were doing in that space with our objectives to support our SoCs in the open source community as well, and providing those resources to those community partners as well. We saw, a lot of changes out there in the open source ecosystem, but we really hadn't changed our business practices there to keep up. We needed a lot more automation. We needed to link what we were doing in our systems internally, how we were managing our products, together with what we were releasing on the open source side. We needed a lot better tracking of the distributions that we were making to open source back to the internal product systems that we have. And we saw the need in the future to continue to evolve our support for new models, right? We could see there was a lot more need for automated builds as well in the future coming, and Linaro is such a good partner in that space, in the open source space, to move forward with that sort of capability.
Cool.
So we sort of had a solution envisaged in our discussions with Linaro. We knew we wanted this external hosting service that provided all of the key pieces that we needed for our distribution in an integrated platform. We needed support for Git, we needed support for artifacts, we needed like a service desk for customer and partner questions, we needed wikis, and it all needed to be held together in sort of this project-based model where you have a set of resources that has a consistent set of roles, and those roles needed to align with how we saw, our users interacting with the systems, as well as how we saw our partners interacting with the system. And we needed a really good API to glue that together that could give us the tight integration we needed into our internal business systems and processes. Then on the internal side, we saw we needed some new ways to track the configuration changes that were being made. A lot of what we were doing with the old system was manual, so we needed good ticketing and automation to execute those changes without any manual intervention and track them and track the approvals. And then we also knew we needed to align our release processes. Historically, we'd had a bit of a disparate set of processes across proprietary and open source, and we needed to bring those together in one data-driven process.
Sure. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. So a little bit about what makes up CodeLinaro. Obviously, to help solve and meet these needs that Craig just mentioned, we have to come up with a seamlessly integrated solution, right? So we wanted something that is robust, something that allows communication across from the different those who are collaborating on the project, the different organizations, the customers using everything. We have integrated email, messaging, wiki documentation for like release notes or build notes. So although most of our support is actually automated, but in the case there's an emergency or something that comes up, there's always someone on call ready to help resolve an issue that is an emergency. And so we decided to use modern DevOps tools for software collaboration, for continuous integration deployment. And we also have a more centralized user management way of looking at things. So you're able to provision a user for, let's say you have an account inside CodeLinaro, and then that person needs to have access to the Git service. We can set that up for them. They just need access to the wiki. They don't need access to anything else. We can set that up this way as well. And it's all done, and it's as a SaaS platform, right? So you just, as you need it, here's that service for that account, and other accounts might have different services available to them and so forth. But it's a fully managed SaaS platform. And it also integrates with existing or even perhaps some new business logic through APIs that can connect internal and third-party systems together. And it also provides a seamless experience for the user where once they are in CodeLinaro, they can access the different services available to them without having to re-log in to each of these services. We wanted that to be very important as well for the user experience, is that I don't have to re-log into a separate system. It's all one system to the user. So they can actually log in once. We use a single sign-on. We actually use Auth0 as the identity provider for that. To go a little bit about this API that Craig and I were mentioning earlier, that kind of wraps all these things together. We built the API using the Open API version 3.0.1 spec, and it allows for quick client integration. You're able to, using like a Swagger tool or different other tools out there, to generate a client based on this Open API file. You're then able to then generate a client that then can communicate directly with our APIs, provided the right credentials needed to make the different requests. So it's really nice in that standpoint to get people up and running quickly. We've also built this API to be cloud-based, and it's inside Amazon Web Services. The API itself is actually built in Node.js, and it's also using the serverless architecture within AWS. So instead of setting up a Linux EC2 instance that is something that's just always on with set resources allocated to it, and then you have minimum set charges each month, and then you just continue to pay for a lot of usage that may not actually be used, instead of paying for what you're using, you're actually paying for a whole lot that may not be used at all. In this case, though, we're using API gateway and Lambda functions. So we actually put the API into the Lambda functions, and API gateway will handle the request coming into the API. It spins up the Lambda to go ahead and perform the operation needed, and then the Lambda spins down when it's done. So we actually only pay for what we use from our standpoint, and it's very responsive, very cost effective. We're only paying for what's actually being used at that time. And the Auth0 integration, as I mentioned earlier, comes in where not just from the single sign-on standpoint from the user through the website, but you could actually have an application, as we do have with Qualcomm, an application where if it's like a system admin level, to be able to create accounts, create projects, and so forth, maintain all that, versus just having a read-only application where they can just fetch anything that's publicly available to them or to that organization. Based on that information, it would all be set in Auth0. So Auth0 would provide a JSON web token, also known as JWT, which would contain the right scopes and permissions needed for that user to then carry out each of those different operations. So it's very secure. You can only use those tokens, you know, ever so often they expire. You have to refresh them and get some new ones and make the new, make new requests. And it's also very particular too, as far as secure from the standpoint of making sure it's coming from the right source that's generating that particular token. So I couldn't just take a token and tweak it and format it the way I want it. It will definitely verify signatures and all that other stuff. It's very, very secure and very, yeah, it's just nice. So Craig, can you go into a little bit about how Qualcomm has been able to take CodeLinaro integrated into its builds and releases?
Yeah, I can go over a couple examples of how we integrate CodeLinaro into our configuration process and then our release process.
Cool.
So like I mentioned earlier, we created this new ticketing system for tracking configuration changes on CodeLinaro. So this here is an example of configuration request screen for creating new repositories and some instructions that are provided for our internal users. So we're able to, provided the users fill out the form correctly, we validate the data against the existing setup in CodeLinaro, make sure they provide a valid project name for an existing project, and then we're able to check with the internal approver who's meant to approve this request for a new repository, and then automate the creation of new repositories at CodeLinaro without any manual steps apart from the approver clicking through to say that they approve. So this has been this is a market improvement on what we did before, and allows a lot of traceability into who requested it, who approved it, when was the change made. We track that both on our side through this this ticketing system, as well as through our automation, and we're able to also check on the CodeLinaro side for those details.
Nice.
And then we have quite a complex user provision model. We have sort of two different types of users. We have both the internal users from the Qualcomm side, and then external users, and we have this automation to ensure these accounts are set up correctly and get the correct permissions. So for internal users, those requests come through from our Jira system that I showed in the last screen. Much like creating a repository, you submit a request to enable a user account. And based on our information in our internal identity management systems, we're able to auto expire if people leave the company, or any other scenarios whereby we need to disable those accounts. And then we have a separate workflow tied into our release systems and our customer-facing systems for external user registration. So a customer is able to create an account for CodeLinaro if that's required for the particular product that they're able to access. So from our proprietary release systems, they can request an account. We can look up the internal product definitions and determine, based on the products that they have access to, what CodeLinaro resources do they need, and then we're able to automatically create their CodeLinaro account, along with setting up all the access permissions that they require for the full set of products that they need. And if they're in the future, if they're added to any products, we're able to easily, add those additional authorizations or access control automatically without any user intervention. Currently in today's system, we have requests for this that need to be processed, that there's some manual processes in there. It doesn't meet the level of tracking that we require, nor is it a good customer experience.
Sure.
So the other thing that we integrated with CodeLinaro, as well as that whole configuration process, was our release process. As I mentioned earlier, we had these slightly disparate processes on the open source side and on the proprietary side. Our open source release process had grown up to be driven by metadata that was embedded into an XML file. This XML file is the repo manifest, which is an Android construct for managing the large set of repositories that need to be synced from a Git server for an Android software tree. And so we'd overloaded that with some metadata to tell us what was distributed where, whereas our proprietary release processes was all data-driven based on product definitions, stored in systems, stored in databases, based on software composition in these sort of internal tools. And what we wanted to do was align those two to both be data-driven, which would enable us to better automate and manage that release process, as well as any private open source that might be subject to agreements to keep it private for some period of time. Access to that could be fully automated and lined up with other systems that we have. So by taking these two release processes and aligning them into one data-driven process, we were able to implement all the checks and balances that we needed. And that required a lot of the API features that CodeLinaro implemented for us. We're able to pre-check that all the repositories exist, pre-check everything exists, set up all the user accounts, all automatically.
Nice.
So I think this is a diagrammatic representation of that release process at a really high level. So when a developer comes along and wants to release a particular tag or build that they've made, they go into our product release system and, hey, here's the build I want to release. This product release system is able to look up the product composition, the software composition that forms that product, find all the repositories, find all the branches, find all the customers that are entitled to that. And then that product release system sends a message to our publishing system, hey, here's all the projects, here's all the Git projects you need to release. Here's the build, here's the customers. And then that publishing system is able to look up in our build system, grab any pre-built binaries that are needed. It goes to the internal Git, it grabs all the branches that are needed for that particular product. And then it's able to push in a unified manner the content both to CodeLinaro as well as to our proprietary release system that's not depicted here. And so now we have this one data-driven process hooked up to all our product systems such that we can automate what our customers have access to and have better historical tracking of all the access and everything that was released.
Nice. Yeah, very powerful for sure. How does Qualcomm plan to leverage CodeLinaro in the future?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about some interesting things we've already found to sort of extend our previous release models with the functionality that's available in CodeLinaro. So we have this is an example that we've already implemented for one of our projects. So we had this request to provide these Docker images to mostly to open source developers who are downstream or upstream, who wanted to just pick up this image and not have to build everything themselves. They just want to pick up the latest build all the time and test their software on top of that. So we set up a system. It's fairly simple in this case. We were just able to leverage CodeLinaro's GitHub organization to have some GitHub actions run the build. So when our developers go to release a new version of the software, that triggers a build in this CodeLinaro GitHub action. That build pulls in other third-party open source as well as the code that we're releasing, publishes an image into CodeLinaro's Artifactory system, into a Docker registry there, and then either downstream automation or these downstream or upstream open source developers are able to come and pull that image. I think we're going to see more and more complex build constructs and automation that we set up. Now we have CodeLinaro up and running, where we really take advantage of the systems that are available.
Nice. Well, thank you for that, Craig. That is actually a good way to introduce some of the new features that we are planning to introduce in CodeLinaro in the future. The thing is with the build process, right? There's a lot with once builds are built, but how can we continually keep things moving forward, and how can we enhance that experience, especially when you're talking about continuous integration? That's a big one, right? Continuous integration, we want to be able to enhance that experience for our customers. And we actually have a couple services in Linaro that, because they have APIs that we can access, we can tie that service in to CodeLinaro and utilize leverage the power of these two services to give a better continuous integration experience for our customers in the process. So what is Lava? Lava in a nutshell is it's a platform that allows us to schedule a bunch of tests to be run. We can schedule so many different jobs, and depending on what the task is, we could actually take that job and set up, it has access to a board farm. So you can say, okay, I need several, these different boards to be running this type of test. And then it will run that test and capture the results that are required from that test. And it puts all that information into a database. And then what we use, because obviously the data coming out from these different boards, it may not make sense when you're just visually looking at things. It may not make sense right away to a non-tech savvy person, perhaps. But that's why we actually use Squad, because then Squad is able to take that data and, using an Elasticsearch engine underneath the hood, make sense of that data, make it queryable, so then we can actually take out and measure things accordingly and say, okay, here is how this test performed, here is how it all came together, and it's in a nice user-friendly fashion. So you could present this data to different stakeholders that need to know the information, depending on what it is. I don't know, right? It really just depends on your project that you have in mind. And we would be able to actually run these tests and give the results, and then continue on with the process from there. So these, again, two very powerful services that we have already at our disposal with the Linaro. So we're looking into integrating these services into our processes with CodeLinaro. So then our customers can start leveraging the power of these as well. We'd be able to trigger these things based on commits coming in, using Docker containers, using our Artifactory service. We'd be able to use an X-ray service that's provided with our Artifactory vendor to be able to scan and find any vulnerabilities with the builds as well, and be able to report on that information, perhaps using Squad. So there's lots of potential for growth here with CodeLinaro. So I'm excited to see what the future holds. It's definitely a fun project to be a part of. So I just first want to say thank you, Craig, again, for your time today. I really appreciate it's been great working with you the last 1.5 years on this project as well, and continuing to work with you even further. And yeah, it's just neat to see how CodeLinaro really does provide quite a punch to be able to give even Qualcomm just a good edge with their build and release processes. So that's exciting.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks to you and the team at Linaro. I think you've really enabled us to solve a lot of problems that we had in our open source release and configuration process.
All right. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them to contact@codelinaro.org. Definitely reach out to us, and we'll be more than happy to respond accordingly. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the Connect.